The man who is not the master of himself can never be the master of anything. There comes a moment in every human life when the quiet truth within whispers louder than the noise of the world. It happens in the pause between responsibilities, in the breath before another day of obligations, in the silent discomfort of realizing that time, your most sacred gift, has been traded, exchanged, spent, or surrendered, without question. In that moment, a question surfaces, sharp as a blade and impossible to ignore. Asterisk, whose life am I truly living? For many, the answer is uncomfortable. You wake, you move, you work, you comply, and little by little you become a passenger in your own existence. You do not steer, you are steered. You do not choose, you react. In the system, that massive invisible structure built from expectations, demands, routines, and pressures, grows stronger with every hour you give away unconsciously. But time, Napoleon Hill taught, is not merely a measurement. Time is potential. Time is the raw material from which destiny is shaped. Time is the one form of wealth every human being receives in equal proportion. Yet the difference between the successful and the defeated lies in how consciously you begin to realize that the system was never an external enemy. It was an internal permission slip, a silent agreement you signed without noticing, an agreement that traded your potential for predictability, your imagination for routine, your ambition for acceptance. But now, as you reclaim your time, you tear that agreement apart piece by piece. You stop living as a product of expectations and start living as the expression of intention. This transformation does not happen loudly. It unfolds quietly, in the decisions others overlook. It happens when you wake before the world demands your attention, when you direct your first thoughts toward creation rather than reaction. It happens when you say no to what drains you and yes to what expands you. It happens when you stop seeking validation and start seeking alignment. The world has always belonged to the few who understood that time is the soil in which all achievement grows. And just as a gardener chooses what to plant, you must choose what to cultivate in the fertile ground of your hours. Plant distractions, and you harvest regret. Plant discipline, and you harvest freedom. Plant clarity, and you harvest purpose. Plant intention, and you harvest legacy. This is what Napoleon Hill meant when he wrote that every human must take complete possession of his own mind. It was never a metaphysical suggestion, it was a practical blueprint for reclaiming life itself. Because the individual who possesses his mind possesses his minutes, and the individual who possesses his minutes possesses his destiny. But to buy back your time, you must confront a truth that many fear. Freedom requires sacrifice. Not the sacrifice of joy or peace, but the sacrifice of excuses, of distractions, of the identity that kept you comfortable but powerless. You must let go of the version of yourself who believed he was trapped, because that identity cannot coexist with the one who commands his own future. Ford understood this. Before he built the automobile empire that changed the world, he worked long hours as an engineer. He did not wait for permission to own his time. He carved it out of nights when exhaustion tried to claim him. He invested his stolen minutes into experiments, sketches, failures, and revisions. And with each small investment, he quietly built a life that would one day free him from the system entirely. Disney understood it. He worked in cramped, dimly lit rooms, drawing into the late hours while the world slept. His time was not free, so he purchased it with determination, discipline, and refusal to surrender his dream. Every stroke of a pencil was a declaration of ownership. A declaration that his vision would not be dictated by his circumstances, and Lincoln understood it. Long before he stood as a leader of a divided nation, he spent countless silent hours studying by candlelight, shaping a mind that would one day shape a country. He reclaimed his time not with wealth, but with will, and that will transformed him into a man capable of carrying the weight of history. These individuals did not break the system by fighting it, they transcended it by mastering themselves. To buy your own time, you must build yourself into the kind of person who the system cannot contain. This begins with belief, not belief in luck, or fate, or chance, but belief in your capacity to direct your future. Belief that your time is worth defending. Belief that your life has a purpose beyond survival. Belief that the hours you invest in your growth will yield returns beyond anything the system could ever offer. But belief alone is not enough. It must crystallize into vision, a vision so clear, so compelling, so alive in your mind that it begins to rewrite your behavior. A vision that becomes the silent commander of your actions. A vision that guides you when distractions whisper, when doubts arise, when fatigue tempts you to revert back to the comfort of unconscious living. This vision does not need to be grand in the beginning. It simply needs to be true. It needs to express who you are when the noise of the world fades. It needs to reflect your deepest desire for the person you wish to become. Once this vision exists, time bends around it. Hours align with it, habits strengthen it, and the system no longer feels like a cage. It feels like a background structure that no longer governs your existence. But vision without discipline is a dream without architecture. It collapses under its own weight. And so because once you reclaim your time internally, life begins to reveal the external steps required to reclaim it completely. You start to see the hidden cost of every habit, every distraction, every commitment made without intention. You start noticing how much of your life was shaped not by choice, but by momentum. The momentum of old patterns, old beliefs, old fears, and old expectations that once governed your behavior without resistance. And for the first time, you begin to question everything, not from a place of rebellion, but from a place of awakening. You question why you rush, why you comply, why you hurry to meet demands that do not align with your purpose, why you sacrifice your mental clarity for fleeting entertainment, why you allow the priorities of others to override your own, why you have spent so many years responding to life rather than creating it. This questioning is not a crisis, it is the birth of consciousness. It is the moment when you stop living as an effect and begin living as a cause. The moment when you stop moving through life on autopilot and begin steering with intention. The moment when the system loses its illusion of authority, because you finally recognize that it was your unconscious participation that gave it power. And so you begin the process of designing your days with the precision of an architect. Not every day will be perfect. Not every hour will go exactly as planned. But each day becomes a deliberate step toward a life in which your time belongs to you. This is when purpose enters, not as a philosophical idea, but as an internal compass. Purpose is what transforms discipline from a burden into a privilege. Purpose is what gives meaning to the hours others overlook. Purpose is what turns effort into devotion. Purpose is the invisible engine behind every individual who has transcended the limitations of circumstance. Hill understood that purpose is not found, it is created. It emerges gradually, through reflection, effort, and the willingness to listen to the quiet calling that has always existed beneath the noise. Purpose is the voice of your highest self, guiding you not toward comfort, but toward growth. And once purpose is established, something extraordinary happens. Priorities reorder themselves naturally. The things that once distracted you lose their appeal. The activities that once drained you no longer tempt you. The demands that once controlled you no longer intimidate you. You begin to feel a shift, a deep, internal alignment, as if your life is finally facing the direction it was always meant to face. But purpose alone cannot buy back your time. For that, you must cultivate adaptability. The individual who is rigid is easily controlled. The individual who fears change becomes dependent on stability, and dependency is the root of captivity. To truly reclaim your time, you must become flexible mentally, emotionally, strategically. You must learn to adjust your methods without compromising your mission, to shift your approach without losing your aim, to release old plans when life demands new ones, because time wasted in resistance is time stolen from your future. Adaptability is the trait that allowed Lincoln to navigate the chaos of war. It allowed Edison to fail thousands of times without losing momentum. It allowed every great leader to withstand pressure without breaking. And when adaptability merges with purpose, and purpose merges with discipline, and discipline merges with vision, you develop resilience, the iron of the soul. Resilience is what keeps you standing when circumstances attempt to bend you. It is what keeps you focused when the world tries to distract you. It is what keeps you grounded when fear whispers its familiar lies. Resilience is not hardness, it is commitment. The commitment to rise every time you fall, to continue every time you hesitate, to push forward every time the system tries to pull you back. And as resilience strengthens, you begin to understand that buying back your time is not a single moment. It is a continuous negotiation between who you are and who you are becoming. You buy your time back when you wake early to build your future while others sleep. You buy your time back when you invest in knowledge instead of temporary pleasure. You buy your time back when you say no to what once controlled you. You buy your time back when you stop waiting for motivation and begin acting from commitment. You buy your time back when you choose growth over comfort, clarity over noise, purpose over distraction. Every day becomes a transaction, a trade between your present self and your future self. And the question becomes, are you trading your time for progress or for escape? Because the individual who trades his time for escape eventually escapes into regret. But the individual who trades his time for progress eventually escapes. Because the final stage of reclaiming your time is not internal mastery alone. It is strategic transformation. It is the deliberate restructuring of your life so that your hours no longer slip through the cracks of routine, exhaustion, obligation, and unconscious repetition. It is the stage where intention becomes architecture, and architecture becomes freedom. At this point, you begin to notice something extraordinary. The world rewards those who take ownership of their time. Opportunities flow toward those who carry themselves with clarity. Respect follows those who respect themselves enough to direct their days. And life, in its mysterious yet predictable way, begins to open doors for those who no longer live as prisoners of circumstance. But before these doors become pathways, you must confront the greatest illusion of modern living, the illusion of busyness. People fill their schedules with noise and call it progress. They mistake activity for achievement. They mistake exhaustion for productivity. They mistake movement for direction, and the system benefits from this confusion. Because as long as you are busy, you are predictable. As long as you are exhausted, you are compliant. As long as you are overwhelmed, you are easily controlled. To buy back your time, you must break this illusion completely. You must become the type of person who measures progress not by hours spent, but by outcomes created. Not by how much you do, but by how intentionally you do it. not by speed, but by accuracy. Not by quantity, but by quality. This shift in measurement is life-altering. It forces you to stop scattering your energy across dozens of meaningless tasks and begin investing it into the few actions that actually move your life forward. It forces you to ask, what is essential? What is useless? What is draining? What is building? When you ask these questions honestly, the architecture of your life begins to rebuild itself. You simplify. You streamline, you focus. You eliminate the unnecessary with the calm authority of someone who finally understands that their time is priceless. And as the unnecessary falls away, what remains is power. The power to direct your days consciously. You stop living in reaction. You stop being overwhelmed. You stop giving your hours to people, habits, and obligations that do not align with your purpose. This is the moment when you become dangerous, not to the world, but to the patterns that once held you captive. Because nothing is more powerful than a human being who owns his time. At this stage, you begin to realize that buying back your time requires one more essential component: the courage to choose long-term reward over short-term comfort. This courage is rare. It is difficult. It is uncomfortable. But it is the defining characteristic of every individual who has risen beyond the limitations of the system. Edison sacrificed comfort for creation. Ford sacrificed stability for innovation. Carnegie sacrificed leisure for growth. Disney sacrificed predictability for imagination. They were not built by ease. They were built by effort directed with precision. And so you too must embrace this truth. The value of your time is determined by the quality of your sacrifices. If you sacrifice discipline, you sacrifice your future. If you sacrifice clarity, you sacrifice direction. If you sacrifice intention, you sacrifice identity. But if you sacrifice distraction, you gain focus. If you sacrifice comfort, you gain progress. If you sacrifice excuses, you gain freedom. Buying back your time is not a philosophical concept. It is a series of practical exchanges. You exchange short-term pleasure for long-term purpose. You exchange the approval of others for the authority over yourself. You exchange the habits that drain you for the habits that build you. You exchange the identity that survived for the identity that thrives. And with each exchange, you lift yourself out of the system that once dictated your days. But there is an even deeper truth beneath all of this. To buy back your time, you must stop thinking like a worker and start thinking like a creator. And so you stand here at the threshold of the life you have known and the life you are capable of creating, aware that the difference between the two is not talent, luck, or timing, but the ownership of your time. This is the doorway through which every great thinker, every innovator, every architect of destiny has walked, often alone, often misunderstood, yet always guided by the certainty that their hours were too precious to be surrendered to the passive rhythm of the world. And you feel this certainty rising within you now, a quiet but undeniable force reminding you that your time is not a currency to be spent accidentally, but a resource to be invested with precision. It reminds you that every hour directed with purpose becomes a step toward autonomy, and every hour surrendered unconsciously becomes a step back into captivity. This is why the system fears the individual who takes control of his time, not because he becomes rebellious, but because he becomes unpredictable, self-directed, and powerful. The system can predict the patterns of the unconscious, but it cannot predict the path of the awakened. An awakening begins with a single decision, one that you must make with conviction. The decision to stop living as the effect of your environment and begin living as the cause of your destiny. At first, this decision feels internal, almost invisible, but soon it begins to manifest in your actions. You start choosing differently. You start thinking differently. You start moving through the world with the quiet determination of someone who is no longer available for distractions, whose time is no longer for sale, whose life is no longer negotiable. Others may not understand this transformation. Some may call it obsession, some may call it intensity, some may call it distance, but you will know the truth. It is alignment. And alignment always appears extreme to those who have not yet experienced the clarity of purpose. You will begin noticing the difference between the activities that drain your energy and the activities that elevate it. You will begin understanding that your mind is not a container, but a conductor. What flows through it shapes what flows out of you. And so you choose deliberately what enters your attention, because attention is the gateway through which time becomes destiny. When you control your attention, you control your life. And this control is not rigid, it is intentional. It is the quiet, unwavering decision to protect your mental space from noise, your emotional space from negativity, and your time from anything that pulls you away from your mission. This is how freedom is built, not in sudden bursts of revolution, but in consistent acts of self-mastery. And as these acts accumulate, something powerful happens. Your relationship with time changes. You stop seeing time as something you chase and begin seeing it as something you command. You stop fearing the passing of days and begin welcoming them as opportunities for expansion. You stop regretting the hours lost and begin honoring the hours ahead. Time becomes your ally rather than your adversary. It becomes a partner in the construction of your future. It becomes a canvas on which you paint the life you once believed was out of reach. And with this new relationship, a deeper truth becomes clear. Time does not belong to those who have the most resources. It belongs to those who use their resources with intention. The wealthy do not buy freedom with money, they buy it with decisions. The influential do not gain power through force, they gain it through clarity. The fulfilled do not escape obligations, they transcend them by creating a life in which obligations serve their purpose instead of obstructing it. And now you see that the same possibility exists for you, not someday, not when conditions are perfect, but now. Your life does not change when the world gives you permission, it changes when you give yourself permission. Permission to focus, permission to grow, permission to elevate, permission to direct your time toward the person you are becoming instead of the person you have been. This is the moment when you stop negotiating your boundaries. This is the moment when you stop apologizing for your ambition. This is the moment when you stop shrinking to fit into a life that no longer aligns with your vision. Because you understand now what so few ever realize. Buying back your time is not about escaping the system. It is about outgrowing it. It is about becoming the kind of individual whose purpose, discipline, conviction, and clarity make him ungovernable by anything except his own mission. And as this mission strengthens, as your identity shifts, as your time aligns with your intention, you begin to feel the weight of the world lift, not because life becomes easier, but because you become greater. Greater in awareness, greater in discipline, greater in purpose, greater in power. And now, as the architect of your destiny, you stand in the rare and sacred position of those who have reclaimed the one resource that shapes all others, your time. And there is only one step left to walk fully into the life that such ownership will inevitably create.